Hello and welcome to Power Reflections, proud member of the Doof Network where we reflect on Wildbird's most homegrown work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse,
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
and we are here to talk about Shaking Hands 9.2, 9.3, and Path Practicalities. Let's dive right in with Shaking Hands 9.2. We're in Verona's head, but for both of these chapters, it's really reflections on the relationships with these new others and how to befriend them, I suppose. Verona starts that trend with kind of thinking about how all of these others seem to hate her and the trio, and, what can we do to solve that problem?
Yeah, it's like a fantastically Verona way to kick it off because it's sort of like, oh man, all these literal monsters don't like me and might want to kill me,
Mm,
but at least I'm not mowing the lawn or doing laundry.
yeah, it was,
I can fix this problem.
it was pretty funny. Immediately bring up the dad comparison and start comparing things to a dad, and that will be something that we hit a little bit again later. Actually, no, it happens almost immediately where Ken, uh, Verona thinks about how Ken reminds her of her dad. But yeah, it's good for her to think, okay, the dad stuff that's really horrible and annoying, but let's start solving this other problem.
So I'm gonna push back a little bit on it being her dad that she compares this stuff to because it's like she just mentioned her dad specifically in terms of like, oh, having to deal with his underwear in the laundry or having to fold his shirts in the right way or whatever, and it's like that's actually just like a normal kid complaint. Like I don't know,
Yeah, yeah, fair enough.
that's not her dad being a dick specifically. I think most kids whinge about that stuff. It was more like I've had less of a focus on her dad being a part of it. More, it's just like again, it's that Verona hates regular life sort of beat.
Mm. Yeah, true. That's fair. Her dad does come up when thinking about Ken, though, which
Yeah,
is interesting because we kind of had when we first heard about Ken, we had Lucy's response being, "Well, that's shit," and Verona and Avery kind of were supporting her on that, but didn't express their own kind of opinion. But we're seeing here like Ken really does kind of represent or demonstrate all the worst parts about Kenneth, each of these three Kennetiers, and I'm I'm interested to see how their relationship goes, considering they are these like sworn protectors of Kenneth, right? Like they have to have a relationship with Ken, and so having their initial relationship be tainted by effectively reminding them of the things that they hate about society in general is a
Mm.
really interesting beat to start from.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Like as you said, that's the really fun thing about Ken is you can totally gauge where you're at based on how he treats you. And
Mm.
honestly, I imagine there's a thing where if you're shitty to Ken, then the town would just get a bit harsher towards you. Um,
Yes, it's interesting. I mean, some of this stuff starts coming up. The idea of a town spirit where he is kind of representative of the town and things that happen to the town happen to him and vice versa. It is very interesting. And it's an interesting vulnerability, but also obviously an interesting strength that can be exploited, right?
yeah, yeah, and we go into that like in more detail when Avery has a chat with him next chapter.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, he's such an interesting thread to follow because like Ken is very bleak in a lot of ways. Like as he sort of touched it, the fact that the like modal person in Kennet is like an older version of Verona's dad is a pretty fucking grim
Mm.
way to introduce him. Plus we obviously had Lucy's roast when we first met him, as you said. It's just kind of like we know that this whole magical world does kind of sit beneath, in some ways, the world of the innocents. Like you have big things like the Carmine stuff, which starts to affect the innocents a little bit, but for the most part, I feel like something we keep sort of hearing is innocence shaped the magical world a lot more than the other way around.
Mm.
And so this idea that it's like, oh, well, let's take the innocents, which up until now I'd viewed as this sort of faceless mass of people, and we'll give them an embodiment in the story. Like,
Mm.
this is the face of all these people who we just genericize, and it's just this, yeah, piece of shit guy. Like,
Well,
sort of
it's
like,
interesting. We can get into this a bit more because Verona and Avery and Lucy's reactions are like he's a dead end kind of person, which I think is fair. He seems to be pretty uninspired and pretty uninspiring, but he treats them fairly nicely. I don't know. He's not actively shitty.
Yeah, yeah, not active. Yeah, yeah. We'll get there, I suppose,
Yeah,
when
in
we see
Avery's
him. But like,
chapter. Yeah.
just as a concept, I was just sort of like, we've seen how the innocent hold way more power than they realize in this
Mm,
story, right, and in this world. And then just to sort of get this, here is this sort of modal innocent person, and it's just not a very pretty picture. And it's kind of like, okay, so like while we've got all these others struggling, we've also got Ken, who's just this kind of shitty guy who's just kind of coasting.
mm.
I can't wait to sort of see where we go with him as a concept.
Definitely. Um, then we get into the idea of a Todd and a Barney, which is such a fun thing to hear. We kind of found out about this, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's kind of cool." But the way Toadswallow describes it, like it is effectively the stuff of legends for both the human and the goblin, right? And I don't know if this is the beat that we're meant to draw from, but it really had me thinking, like, humans and others, when they collaborate, they are more than just the sum of their parts. They can be something really special.
Yeah, no, I really like that observation. It's because especially like, I mean, obviously what Toadslaw describes here isn't ideal, but it's not that bad. I mean,
Mm.
like shutting down international drug cartels, I can get behind that.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
like at
like
the
a step away from becoming like a hero, like a kind of heroic ideal, right?
Yeah, like I can look at this and think, oh yeah, you could make a version of this that I can get behind. Um, yeah, no, I really like that because I feel like that is so much of what this story has been talking about is that like if everyone just fucking works together and isn't shitheads, things would
Mm.
go a lot better.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, the, the other thing I took away from the Todd and Barney stuff is the vibe that I'm getting from the others is that I don't feel like any of them are in a huge rush to fix this situation.
Mm.
Um, like Blunt sort of casually comments on how this cratering effect of all trouble coming to Kennet is like, oh, that means that Barneys might actually work in this town. And then whenever they actually try to talk about fixing the barrier or y- anything like, there's a point where Matt casually sort of brings up, oh yeah, the Carmine stuff is going to start to affect innocents individually soon.
Mm.
And then they always sort of find an excuse to brush it away, and it got like because I think it was in 9.1 that we had Alpi or Crooked Rook via Alpi start to say like, yeah, the culprits want things like this,
Mm.
and like looking around this meeting here, I can you start to be like, okay, I can see that like this group of goblins who want their Barney, they're probably not looking to fix Kennet and put it back how it was.
Mm. Yeah, it's an interesting thought. Do we think that this is indicating then that the goblins are behind it, or do we think that there is more? This is just a kind of example of why an other might not want it to go back, and there's going to be more stuff like this coming up soon.
Yeah, well, it's just like based on this, I wouldn't be shocked if those goblins took the side of the culprits when the culprits unmasked themselves,
Mm.
and are sort of like, we're going to leave things like this. These
Mm.
goblins taking their side, I'd be like, well, okay, no, I can see their logic behind that.
Interesting. Yeah.
Um, and because a lot of these others came here because of the cratering. So of course they're the sorts of people who are more likely to thrive in environments like this. So they're more likely to be the kinds who, yeah, are
Yeah,
okay with this
true.
status quo.
I guess if they came here because of the catering, why would they not just want the catering to be the status quo?
Yeah, I mean, some like Nibble and Chloe. I think Nibble would be stoked to get back to the old Kennet. So it's not like it's like everyone, but it's just it's better odds that the people who are
Yeah.
you know, affiliated with the cratering and the Carmine chaos are more
Mm.
likely to be the sorts who are okay with leaving it like that.
Mm. Interesting. Very interesting.
Also, like this comes up a bunch in the last chapter and these two chapters as well. I feel like we're setting up the bads of this arc to be this fucking band of mysterious others who nobody can seem to get a beat on, and I can't wait to see this unfold. Because do you have any idea what they could be?
I really don't. Like, I'm trying
Right?
to think, is there some group of others that we've met that could pose a threat like this that are that would have a good payoff, or is there like, could it be like, oh, it's some fairy that we bumped into or something? But I really don't know.
Yeah.
The pig dog man, maybe, or like, I don't know.
Well, they're human passing. That's basically the only thing we know about them is that
Yes.
well, the assumption is that since they haven't been detected, they must be able to pass as human.
Yeah. Which presumably means they're intentional, like they're kind of intentionally hiding out as humans, I would say, right? Which
Yeah,
kind of
like
puts Faye as a pretty good guess.
yeah. I mean, I like the other interesting thing is I feel like I'd have to go and recheck the details. I should have rechecked this before coming here with this theory, but I think they said that these others they've been detecting them since Ken like showed up, and there was like this assumption that oh they got here while we were all away
Yeah,
making Ken. But what if they've just been here for like
for
two
the whole
months?
time.
Like you know.
What if Verona's dad has actually been another this entire time?
I mean, yeah, I was surprised you didn't pitch Booker and Alyssa um, before. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe it's someone being possessed or something. Like they are people. They're more like Edith.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't
I
know.
don't know. Interesting.
I can't wait for this. Like they've set them up. I'm fully on board for these people for their thing to bubble up and explode.
Mm, mm, yeah, yeah. It's exciting. I mean, we're getting towards the state where things are all going to start popping off, right?
Yep.
Um, so yeah, this conversation between the gang moves on to just kind of getting a general picture of how Kennet is doing as a whole. The barrier seems to be in shambles as expected, but the town is kind of just about holding itself together.
Yeah, and I made a little summary of the things of the barrier because at least for me, it didn't click the first time I read it.
Hmm.
But so there's three parts to the barrier. There's making Kennet inhospitable to intruders, the part where it just works as a straight up barrier and keeps them out. And then there's that like alarm slash distraction system. So there's one system that kind of tells the right people when someone comes in and also does its best to make them not pay attention to the right stuff.
Yep.
And basically only one of these is working. The part that makes it inhospitable to intruders. Is the only part that is still working as it should. With the added caveat that whenever they put Monty in, it does it differently.
Yeah, kind of better, but more violently, right?
Yeah, or there are certain types of practices that become enhanced rather
Yes,
than
true.
dampened.
Yeah. Um,
But yeah, but like things like the actual straight up barrier part is down, and they talk about bringing it back, but it sounds like it's just not going to happen at the moment.
well, I mean, yeah, it effectively sounds like, yes, this is something that could be on the table, but in brackets, not until the comment beast stuff. Not until the
Yeah.
story's over, not until the conflicts of the story are resolved.
And then the alarm slash distraction part, they actually like took more of it down because when it's not working, it like attracts people to it or something. So
Mm,
yeah, it basically it was like a very detailed way of just making sure we understand that like it's not we're not fixing this. The barrier's gone.
yeah,
Like Kennet was this nice little gated community for others, and it's just not that anymore.
yeah. We need Miss back, huh?
Oh, I mean, yeah, well, maybe Avery will get on that soon.
Yeah.
Eh, I also, I mean, I guess I'm jumping ahead a bit, but there's this part where Nibble sort of summarizes what's going on with the others that I wanted to talk about because obviously they're a big theme for Verona at least is how much the new others don't sort of trust them.
Hmm.
And Nibble summarizes it so well at the end, where he sort of talks about how the new others they never experienced Kennet as it was,
Mm,
like the Kennet others, or the OG Kennet others who awakened the trio. They'd been living in this comfortable sanctuary for a long time, and it was sort of like they had that comfort and that stability to be like willing to awaken practitioners and muddy it up a bit to solve this murder. Whereas like all these newbies, they've got terrible pasts. They haven't experienced that stability ever. They're being told, "Oh yeah, it can totes happen," but
mm,
they're not seeing it. So of
yeah.
course, when practitioners come into the mix, like there's not that inherent, "Oh, these three will try to help us make it better," because they haven't seen that better.
Yeah, if they don't have the picture of what it used to be like, it's hard to kind of take at face value that the Kennetiers are, on the right team with it.
Especially, and because the Kenneteers came after. the Carmine Beast was murdered, which is like when it all started to go downhill. So
Yeah.
like you can see how if you zoom out away from our like protagonist bias,
Mm,
them joining the town is kind of synonymous with it all going to shit.
mm, yeah.
But yeah, like in the meeting here, Lucy has this comment where she says, "We're the practitioners of Kennet, and I hope we'll be serving you guys in some way for a good long time."
Mm.
And I like that. That to me was the moment where I was like, "Come on, everybody, listen to that!"
We can
Like,
all work together and be friends.
yeah, what she say, serving you guys, because I feel like it's been set up like over and over that like practitioners were kind of set up to like police others and protect the innocents or whatever.
Mm.
And this is Lucy sort of framing it as like, oh no, like you are citizens here as well, and we should be serving
Yeah.
you as well. And it was
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's the difference. That's the bit I wanted all the others to latch onto.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a different mindset, but it's hard to overcome. It's hard to overcome the years, decades, centuries of other subjugation at the hands of practitioners, I suppose.
Yeah, which yeah, I mean,
Fair
fair enough.
enough. Yeah. Um, Montague is interesting here to me because this chapter really reaffirmed to me how much he seems to be the only thing that is like holding what remains of the barrier together, right?
Mm.
Like without Montague, it seems like this inhospitable part of the barrier stuff would just fall apart and they would just have nothing, right? Absolutely nothing. And it makes me worry about Montague's allegiances and stuff like that. When if he's the last thing that's kind of holding that together narratively, if he goes away or is on the opposite side or whatever to our Kennetiers, things are going to get worse, much worse.
Yeah, I mean, because you're right. He's so interesting. Like this affinity he has for like yeah, diagrams and being able to reinforce them seems like
Mm,
massively powerful.
yes.
Um, and but then like yeah, there's other moments like he offers the Kenneteers like the gifts. Like he's the one who brings up the gifts.
Mm,
And like Ken's reaction to this makes me think that like Montague is actually just a bit of a big nerd. Um, like I think it was Montague who was like they were having trouble getting him to sign on to the town until it was like, oh, you can hang out with Edith and Tashlit and Alpy, and then he was like, oh, okay, and that was like what got him to sign on.
yeah.
So it's just, yeah, I don't know. It's like it's easy when you think of like a sentient pool of blood or like Sig the cigarette. I think I fall into the habit of ascribing them as not having much of a personality,
Mm.
but I think Monty clearly has. Yeah, like he's a bit of a goody two shoes, which is bizarre given that he turns everyone into like paranoid Fruit Loops when he takes over the diagram. But yeah,
Well, it's interesting because Sig has been explicitly described as not having a personality, right? Which, I don't know, maybe it's just like the human tendency to ascribe a personality to anything, but I'm having real trouble reconciling in my head.
but it's hard like with some of these others, like particularly Monty and Sig. I'd say they're the ones where it's sort of like they're not a whole like personality or
Yeah,
person or whatever. They've got these bits and pieces, and it's really hard to like conceptualize Monty having some aspects of a personality, but maybe not others.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. Um, just going to point out again how great goblins are. They're hilarious. They get a lot of hilarious beats in this chapter, as they do in every chapter that they're in. They're by far the best kind of other, and I love them.
Yeah, there's some great moments. Like they're always the funniest to me when they feel like a fucking like group, a class of kindergartners
Yeah.
that you're just trying to herd. Like this bit where they're all asking questions or not asking questions. I love the moment where Lois is like, yeah, one of them's like, I heard you bet America 10. It's like, well, that's not a question. But
Mm-hmm.
yes, we did.
Oh, goblins. So yeah, the Kennedy brothers have a chance to ask questions, but nobody really gets to the meat of any of these matters. It's all just kind of minor questions and setting up minor things.
Yeah, I mean, there's still massive distrust of them as practitioners, as we sort of talked about. But it's just good. I like just as an aside for this whole meeting scene. It's so good just seeing everyone interact, like not just our newbies, but we get like cutaway moments where like Marissa is chuckling in the background, and Verona has a "oh yeah, I did that" moment when she thinks back to dodging the murder investigation.
Mm.
it's just fun seeing everyone in this room together.
Yeah, seeing everybody come together in the, like establishing who all of our players in this mystery might be,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Nibble asks about like, oh, how's the investigation going? And that to me, whenever anyone asks that, it's immediately suspicious, right? Of like, why are you trying to gather data about this? But I don't know. I'm inclined to kind of think it's nothing, but maybe it is a clue.
I had the same thing, bro, because then he's like, "Oh, I just, it's not important to me. I was just asking." And it's like, "Yeah, but is it
But is
important
it
to someone
important?
else who
Yeah,
made you ask?"
yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, I like his excuse of, "Oh, I've just been watching a lot of like crime drama TV." 'Cause, I mean, he's a TV watch man. It's kind of hard to avoid crime dramas as well.
yeah. So maybe he is just interested in interesting plot developments, which is kind of what Kennedy is, right? So that's a fair excuse.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I go back and forth. It's definitely if something comes up with Nibble later on, we'll definitely point at this.
Point back to it and be like,
Uh
oh, we knew it.
huh.
Yeah.
I mean, the most heated things get here is when the topic of like the gifts comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Because like, what were Matthew and Edith trying to? Like, it's so poorly handled. Like, they
Yeah.
basically bring it up as like, yeah, technically they all owe you gifts, and you can be a dickhead and demand them, or you could just leave them alone. You assholes.
Yeah. It was a
What?
weird
Like,
one, wasn't it?
it's just like I can't believe that they're that stupid that this wasn't partially intentional. Like, it just has to have been.
Well, there's this other thing where when we're talking to Nibble a bit later, where he kind of brings up that the way that finding out about the Kenneteers was, it was almost an afterthought, right? And that's
Mm.
like Matthew and Edith have really fucked up the dynamics between the new Kennet others and the Kenneteers, and it's hard not to look at that and be like, is that intentional?
Yeah, I thought that as well, but then to be fair, if you do think about like what the negotiation, no, because no, there was no time pressure on the negotiation. You could totally brought up that hey, the three practitioners will be back, but they're cool
But
before
that
signing people
probably
up.
would have been a turn off for almost all of
Yeah,
these new Kennet others, right? For Crooked Rook, definitely.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, yeah, you're right. Like it's just yeah. I kept being like, I don't understand what the two of you are up to. Like, how much am I
Mm.
chalking this up to intentional sabotage because you're the villains, and how much is just incompetence?
Yeah, or just, I mean, it obviously is a difficult situation, right?
Oh yeah,
A
well they couldn't
very
handle
careful
everything
situation.
correctly. Like I'm willing to cut them some slack. Like there's a lot going on, but still some of this stuff is just like,
It
oh
is
come on, you
pretty
knew where
rough,
that was
yeah,
going.
yeah. Um,
Yeah. No, so they do settle with all the others on like this very transactional idea
mhm,
for the gifts, which reminded me a lot of like that was how Avery first connected with Jessica.
mm,
Like Avery was sort of like, "Oh, we could just do this because we're nice people," and Jessica was like, "No, I want the promises and the gifts."
mm,
Uh so yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll see. Like, I'm always a bit bummed when you have this emphasis on like fairness and treating things transactionally to avoid, like, yeah, to avoid being stabbed. Like, it shows this inherent distrust. So I
yeah.
wonder if we'll crack them like we did Jess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming it's kind of similar. It also gives me vibes of like um, the interactions between Fernanda and Avery in the Fae field trip, where it's like, we have this thing that we kind of need to stick to the letter of the law of, so we'll just figure out a way to do that. But then that can also be a kind of wedge through which you achieve an actual friendship or camaraderie, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
No, that's a good point. Like, because Fernanda is sort of more than anyone else we've seen that person who views everything transactionally because she had an inherent distrust of everyone.
mm,
And then she sort of started to open up a bit with Avery. Um, yeah, I like that.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I do think they get to a pretty. I mean, I'm not sure where else they could get to with this transaction, other than this transactional thing, right? Like, it is just a bit of like, okay, well, we will ask for gifts from you, but once we've done something to help you out, so you can see that we're kind of on the same page here.
It's a good door opener. Yeah.
Um, so then Avery drops something big here. She wants to kind of expand on what Kennedy is and get more practitioners into the fold. This idea is not received well.
Yeah, it caught me off guard that she just decided to open with that. Like, even Verona is like, "What? What?"
Yeah.
Um, yeah, catches you off guard. It's very fun. So she just because I feel like they were just starting to earn some goodwill,
I
and then
know.
Avery's like,
Avery kind of
"I'm gonna."
burns it a bit here.
Yeah, it's like, "Oh, we got 10 cents of goodwill. Cool. I'm gonna cash in $1 million."
Yeah. I obviously get both sides, right? For the others,
Yeah,
it is just like, I mean, you guys are bound to be helpful to the town. What if we bring other practitioners in? We're kind of fucking ourselves, right? But the thing that we've talked about many times on this show is the idea of Kennet is something that is so radically transformative and has the power to transform the way that human and other relationships work in general. That doesn't happen if it can't get outside of Kennet, right? Like, if this change is going to permeate eventually, other practitioners will need to see the example of it working well in Kennet. That without that, it's just not going to happen. And so, therefore, I'm on board with Avery's idea. Doesn't have to be immediately, but it does have to be eventually, right?
yeah, I agree. Like, obviously, I'm 100% on board with Avery's idea as well, but we have perspectives that the others understandably don't.
Yes.
But yeah, like I mean, because I think that could be the like this is why I really want to get to Crooked Rook because she's the one who's like I've seen this sort of thing happen before, and I think way back in 5D, Miss was sort of like, oh, things like this happen all the time, but I want these three to set an interesting precedent, and so I'm
Mm,
kind of getting this image that like others trying to form a haven or take over a space like this has happened before and probably will happen again and it's like, is the Kenneteer secret source going to be getting that approved by the region's practitioners or something?
mm,
You know,
yeah.
like, and yeah, so this is why we got to get to Crooked Rook. I want more details on these other failed versions of this that she's seen, and also just to get the 411 on exactly where the fuck she's at because she scares me.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. It is. I mean, it came out of nowhere for me as well, right? But thinking about it, I'm like, you know what? It just makes a lot of sense. Not
Yeah,
just to
like
mention the Kenneteers, like we saw at the Blue Heron Institute. The Kenneteers are so fallible when they're by themselves, right? But as soon as you connect them into this wider community that wants to support them and help them, Nicolette, Zed, etc. It really that it's not even like it's like a factor of 10 or whatever on how useful they're able to be, right?
oh yeah, I mean exactly, and like, but that's also the problem. The reason practitioners have so easily oppressed all the others is because they can work together when they want to,
Mm,
and just do all this shit. So it's like, yeah, I mean, I agree. I think like I'm leaning towards the idea that what Avery is suggesting is the secret sauce that can make this a more workable, permanent solution that could spread. Um, but it's a tough sell in the moment for sure.
mm,
Uh,
yeah, for
uh,
sure.
there's also an interesting technical argument brought up by mostly Verona, in that the idea of bringing practitioners in kind of inherently undermines what Kennet is, which is this sort of, I assume, like a haven away from the system, like the Solomon
Well,
stuff
away from
and practitioners.
practitioners.
Yeah. Um, but I really like Verona's point about how, well, if you set up expectations that practitioners can visit if they like abide by the rules, like that's even better. Like, yeah, like just from the mechanical perspective, talking about what we've just been saying, you can sort of see how, like, yeah, let's bring in other practitioners and have them approve of and abide by the rules, and it will become much more entrenched.
Mm, mm, yeah. Um, so can we touch on Matthew and how he's handling this? Because this part of the chapter really demonstrated to me he just doesn't seem to be handling it very well. It seems like as it's all wrapping up, he's kind of being like, "Oh, can you guys go here? You guys go there. Oh, someone get Jabber and do this. Oh, someone make sure this is happening. Someone do this. Blah blah blah." And it's just like there seems like there's a lot on his plate, and it just no shade, Matthew, but it just doesn't quite look like he's equipped to handle it. Like it seems like he's a few steps away from just kind of breaking down.
Yeah, yeah. Especially like there's a moment in this scene where Liz transforms into a Matthew Edith Liz at one point,
Hmm.
and like the descriptor for her is tired and stressed.
Yeah.
So it's like that's sort of where these two are at.
Yeah.
And yeah, like we've already touched
Oof.
on how there's a bunch of things where it's like, are they grossly incompetent or intentionally sabotaging? Like that's how bad they're doing on some of these things. It's like it has to be one of those two. It couldn't just be, oh, it's just we don't get it. Um
Yeah. It does really reaffirm just how much trouble they're having, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. maybe it is just that they're involved with the murder. This is all just a great act, but I don't think so, right?
I honestly, I don't know. I just get the vibe, and it's weird because I know this kind of contradicts it, but I kind of feel like even if Edith is involved, a lot of this also just is kind of incompetence, and that doesn't make sense. But the vibe I really get from them is just some of this is just beyond them.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, the gang goes out on patrol. That's the Kenneteers, Matthew and Edith, Nibble and Chloe. And Kenneteer trio are chatting to Nibble and Chloe to kind of get the picture from them. And it's pretty sad and grim.
Yeah, although I guess before we launch into Nibble and Chloe and their like fucking terrible situation,
Mm,
uh Matthew and Edith, the way they drop them off here, they go into mum and dad mode, and this is the point where I just can't help but sort of trust them a bit because like Edith is like telling them to be safe and just has this real like a mum moment with them.
mm.
Like she can't be bad. She has to be innocent. Like
She's
yeah,
yeah,
her and Matt are so different outside of these meetings.
yeah. They're so friendly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's. I mean, we've known for a long time that it's not just going to be yes, I was the villain the whole time, blah blah blah,
Mm.
right? But it's still hard to see how it's going to play out like that.
Yeah. Like my sort of assumption at this point is still kind of that whoever the villains are, they've decided that the Seal of Solomon has broken society so completely that they just need like anarchy.
Mm.
I guess I'm just assuming that it's a full on anarchist is the villain. Um, and then we're sort of opposing that with maybe this idea of like trying to build just a better system
Mm.
because tearing it down introduces its own kind of problems.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, it's always a careful balance when the answer to something is we can fix the system from kind of inside the system, right? Which is
Yeah,
a complex and difficult line to walk, I think, at the best of times. But
no,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, exactly like that line of yeah, because like it's so easy to be co-opted by the system if you try to fix it from the inside. Is the problem?
uh-huh, yeah. Um, yeah, so, we've introduced Chloe and Nibble, and I think they're a great other to introduce into our kind of metaphor of Kemet, right? Because they are just ghouls, seem to be just the most shit on type of other, right? Like there's just nothing. There's no positives to this. It's just a curse. Legitimately, it's a curse.
Yeah, and I mean, wasn't their origin story something like, oh, death just didn't bother to collect them?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, like to sort of speak metaphorically, they're just others with like special needs that
Yeah.
the system just can't meet, and anytime they try to make that work, the system sort of shits on whoever is trying to help them. Like it's
Mm.
just, yeah, like they even talk about, oh, there was somebody who was getting a supply, and that sort of person was giving them that supply gets arrested, so you can't even get into a comfortable situation. You can't be that vampire who, like, has a friend at the blood bank because it won't last.
Yes, it just seems like, and this is the attitude they come in with. Like, yes, there are ways for us to get semi regular supplies of stuff, but it will just always fade, and that's always just a stopgap on our deterioration.
Yeah, it won't last.
Yeah. Um, Putting that aside, they seem quite as nice as ghouls can be, you would suppose.
Yeah, I mean, Nibble's definitely chill and cool. Chloe seems, I mean, great if maybe a little unstable.
Yeah,
Uh,
she makes the joke of, "I'm gonna eat you." I mean, I'm joking, like a
yeah,
bunch of times.
she really walks that line. Like even Verona, who's like probably the person in this group who's most comfortable walking the line,
Hmm.
is sort of like, okay, Chloe, like I feel like you're joking a little bit, but maybe not enough.
Yeah,
Um,
guys, wouldn't it be so funny if I just ate your arm right now?
like, I mean,
Whoa,
JK,
JK, just kidding.
or am
Lol,
I?
LOL. But you know, how? What do you? Am I? What would you guys think? Yeah. Anyway. It is fun, but I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think we'll get to a scene where Chloe like rips off Avery's arm and eats it or anything. So I guess it is fun to have in the story.
Yeah, I mean, the question is whether she will like have one of her bad moments at an inopportune time. Like
Yes, for
that
sure.
seems like the Chekhov's gun that Wobber is hanging on a fairly sizable arsenal at this point.
Yes, yeah, he has a lot of Chekhov's guns ready to fire. So yeah, Nibble and Chloe head off to watch a movie, and the remaining group arrive. Matthew and Edith demonstrate what they've wanted to talk about: a tract of land out here that could become Verona's domain. And Verona ponders the permanence of it all.
Oh yeah, because like God, the idea of purchasing a house is terrifying, and I'm like more than twice Verona's age.
Yeah,
Like the idea of committing to a domain is yeah, like terrifying.
yeah. It's good. I guess it's good that it's better late than never on the whole, like worrying about the permanence of committing yourselves to Kennet for the rest of your life. I feel like this could have come a little earlier, when they were doing that the first time, but it's nice to have a moment to reflect on it. And it seems like Verona's finally kind of having these trains of thoughts of like, oh shit, am I going to have to be in Kennet for the rest of my life?
Yeah. Well, and I really like the moment where she takes that step back and is like, before I can even think about what I want the domain to be, I need to figure out what the fuck I want it to be.
Mm,
Like that really resonated with me. I really like that sort of thing. It's like if you don't have your own shit sorted, like you're not, you can't handle it. Um, and yeah, like, and I because I feel like to step back, like this chapter is ending here, and I feel like this ending on Verona considering permanence and change and stuff like that is sort of been her journey. Like I think the chapter we covered 9.1, and then these two here sort of starting like the third overarching chapter of the story. Like now we're back in Kennet, and we're showing how the Kenneteers have grown while they're away. And Verona is like, before she left, she had this idea of I'm going to turn into a cat other or something, and then everything will be perfect. And we sort of end it with this new Verona who's come back, and she's like, well, I mean, things change. Like
mm,
permanence isn't even a solution because the rest of the world is going to change around you. And
mm.
Kennet's such a great metaphor for that because Kennet was this haven and it isn't now. And that's something we've been talking about this whole chapter. And now she can sort of look over that and be like, well, even if I change myself into someone with a cool clubhouse who's an other forever, that's not going to mean that the bad problems go away.
Yeah,
Um,
which I mean, we kind of have been trying to get her to realize for a while. So it's nice that she's starting to have these thoughts, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's even like she thinks of Bristow too. Like there's that moment where she's like, also, even if you like fix a problem, sometimes there's consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I really like this as a way to close like Verona's first chapter in this new part of the story, which is like, she's now starting to realize that she can't just fix all of her problems with some sort of permanent solution.
Yeah, it does kind of feel like we're starting to set up what are the legacies that this story is going to leave us with? What are what's the end state that this story is going to reach? And for Verona, it's her thinking about now, where do I want to be? What do I want my life to be? I mean, I guess that's something she's been thinking about a lot, but it's always been through the lens of becoming another, whereas this is at least through the lens of like, what kind of place do I want to spend my life in?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and like that's the thing. I think each of these three chapters, like the one from last week and both of these ones, check in with each Canneteer and sort of see where they are on their personal journey.
Yeah.
Like we're going to talk a lot about how Avery's growing next chapter, and I think we touched on Lucy's last week. So yeah, it's really cool to sort of see these check-ins as we start a new part of the story here in Canada. Of like, this is where I'm at now, and like, yeah, this is a good checkpoint on the journey, I suppose.
Mm. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
to step back a bit as well, the placement of this domain is also something I wanted to talk about too, because it's like Matthew and Edith are like, "Oh, this is a great place for you to set up your domain," and it's like, at first I was like, "Oh, that's like a really you know generous thing because it's like looking out over the town, so it sets up that imagery of them being like like in Batman watching over the city, protecting it or whatever."
Mm.
But then the more Verona goes into it, the more I thought about it. It's like it's actually away from the town. Like, it's separated by this 4-lane road. Um, it's like this dirt path to get to it. Like, it's separate from the town. It's sort of like it's actually sending this message of you can look over the town or whatever, but you're technically not part of it. Like, you're watchers only, and you can come and visit us, but like the domain isn't in Kennet.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's weird, isn't it? Uh, it's also just kind of like you're right, it's disconnected. It's too disconnected to
Yeah.
feel great. And I like Verona thinking about and talking to Ken next chapter about like, hey, help me find a place that might be better, like an abandoned library in the center of town or something, which obviously is a pretty wild thing to ask for. But uh, I do like that Verona's thinking it can still be in Kennet. It just needs to be more me tying me into Kennet in a more tangible way.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I just think like that, that whole wilderness vibe just wasn't very Verona.
Mm,
Um, and also, yeah, like I don't know if anyone's directly touched on it yet in the story, but like the vibe I got from it was, yeah, very much it's like you can sit out and watch over us, but you will be distinctly away from us.
mm,
And not in it. And I'm going to be watching very carefully when Verona pitches a different location to Matthew and to Matthew and Edith of like, how do they respond if she wants somewhere central in town?
mm. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see, I guess. Um, it's a good question. It's a good question. These are the Verona's domain question, one that has been plaguing us for a while, and it's fun to see where that might lead.
Yeah, there's talk of her doing some wild things to it. Like I can't wait to see what a Verona space looks like. I hope she does get it.
Mm. Yeah.
Poor Jeremy will go in there one day and get swallowed up and never come out.
Yeah, sure. We'll see. Anyway, let's move on to Shaking Hands 9.3, which is from Avery's perspective. Avery's looking at some illicit material on her computer, with her siblings desperately trying to get in. She finally gets some peace and quiet and starts a Zoom with Zed and Nico.
I mean, right from the get go, we're back in the fucking chaos that is the Kelly household in
Mm-hmm.
this chapter. Like Avery has her door splattered with connection blockers that are all slowly, one by one, falling.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's pretty fun. She's desperately trying to keep the chaos of the Kelly family house out, but it's just not working at all.
and I mean, I love this imagery of like Avery calls Zed and Nico, and like when the call finally starts, she's sort of like, oh, this is, I just want to like maintain connections and keep reaching out. Like, we got to stay in touch and maintain our connections. And it's like the whole chapter up until that point has been her fucking sticky connection blockers on the wall to make her family piss off. Like,
Mm,
this idea that she's sort of like, yeah, willing to tell her family to go to hell and give her some space because she needs this other connection. Like, she's now willing to sort of fight these other fuckers for the right to have these other connections.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's nice. She's battling more for what she thinks is right, which is great.
Yeah. But just that contradiction of I'm blocking my family connections so that I can open up the other ones. I was like, that's pretty good.
Mm. Um, some great technomancy stuff from Zed this chapter. He essentially texts Avery a cool connection blocking projector, which is awesome.
Yeah, or I almost got the impression it wasn't connection blocking as much as it was like doing some realms shit because it did like static on the door. It was like, yeah, it's cool either way.
Mm, yeah.
But yeah, they also like just to start diving into the conversation Avery has with Zed and Nicolette. There's brief talk on like how Musa is going as the headmaster. In this way, he's like the opposite of Alexander when it comes to ambition. Like the way Zed, I think it is, phrases it is like, opportunities and power just tend to come to him, so he doesn't really go seeking them.
Mm,
He'll fuck up someone who's in his path, and he tends to choose paths that fuck a lot of people over, but it's not out of some innate drive, it's just kind of what he feels like doing, I
mm,
guess, is the vibe I got.
mm,
I'm like, is
yeah.
this better or worse than Alexander, do you think?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know. Is it better or worse? Is a great question. Uh,
Like, I need Lucy to tell me.
I think better is the answer, right? Like he's at least he's not actively looking for things around that he can kind of like co-opt to his will. I don't know.
No, I think you're right in that he's just maintaining the shitty system, whereas Alexander was like constantly going out and kind of spreading it in a
Yeah,
roundabout way.
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Um, yeah, so Zed brings up a path that Avery might be interested. Ed and his family from Zoomtown need an assist.
Yes, and we'll get into that a lot
Yeah,
more.
it sounds
The
fun.
extra material.
Sounds fun. We'll
Yeah,
get to it in a moment. I guess it's nice just to note this is building more connections with other finders, which I'm sure will be a great thing.
yeah. Well, especially like my big takeaway is like all we want at this point is it's a path that's like crowded with others from other paths.
Mm,
And I was like, well, that sounds perfect for Avery. Like, miss connections and meeting people. Like, yeah, I was just immediately like, this is the ideal path for her. So I can't wait for her to work with other finders to, investigate this space that's full of others. I
mm,
think she'll probably prove to be invaluable because of who she is.
yeah, yeah. Um, so yeah, Nicolette has to leave, so Avery and Zed continue to catch up. Zed gives a bit of his history, and it is pretty glum. He
Yeah.
was, kicked out by his family, and it sounds like his parents are effectively uh, shitbags,
Yep.
Fergals, I think is the technical term.
I almost made the same reference in my life read before realizing nobody would get it.
That's a game
Um,
club reference for those of you who are not paying attention to the game club. You should check it out. Fuck
uh,
Fergal. Yeah.
Yeah, fuck Fergal. Yeah, I mean, like this was hard to read. It sounded eerily similar to like stories I've heard from friends,
Yeah.
just with literal monsters peppered on top
Yeah.
because why not? It's the other verse.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I hope Zed's sister comes out okay and they manage to reconnect.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. There's a nice line that Zed mentions here, saying all it took was support. And it's just a kind of nice reminder of like, with these shitty situations, people getting caught up. I mean, shitty non-practitioner situations, but also shitty practitioner situations. All it takes sometimes is somebody to like look out for you and give a shit about you to really turn a person's life around, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I I hate how true that is. Like it's
yeah,
just that it took Zed to get so much just to finally get someone who would support him like that. Like, and I mean, you could like that's how the Kenneteers have fucking won half their battles. Is
yeah.
like just actually
Is
reaching
giving a
out
shit about people. Yeah,
and trying to help people. It's like that's just what this world needs more of.
yeah,
Um, yeah, like Zed didn't get it from his parents. Like, he has this moment where he talks about like, his dad's response was just to like accuse him of not appreciating all they'd done to raise him. And I was just like, oh, fuck this nonsense. Like, support your goddamn son. Like, yeah, anyway,
yeah. Um, yeah. It's obviously. I mean, hopefully, the beat to draw this out into is, for others like Nibble and Chloe, for example, or Ken or whoever who are kind of in a weirdly depressing place. Maybe just having the Kenneteers give a shit and try and help them will be enough to turn shit around for them.
yeah. I mean, that was kind of what we saw with Jess in a way. Like Jess just having Zed and to a lesser extent Avery
Mm,
got her through
mm,
all of that bullshit that Shelley did.
yeah. Um, yeah. So we'll see. We'll have to see how it goes, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, I guess we'll get to the next part, which is Avery trying to do her best with Sheridan to kind of de-gamer Declan, and it seems to work a bit, but for the wrong reasons, as Grumble remains clueless. I just want to point out to Declan this other friend whose name is Amber. Is it Amber? Is that right?
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
makes games for game jams. Like, she sounds awesome. Declan, you're such a fucking dweeb. Jesus Christ.
You can't not be on board with Avery and Sheridan here.
Yeah.
Just try it. Like the Schadenfreude from this whole section with Declan is just so good. Like the moment where he's just sort of like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Avery. You're so cool," and it's just such fucking bullshit.
He's so pathetic to such a large extent.
Yeah, exactly. And the way he like, yeah, like it was just so good to watch him suffer
Yeah.
basically as he runs out. And I'm like, yeah, I guess we'll see. I remain cautiously optimistic that they're going to, de-gamer him.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, obviously, it seemed to he was so engaged with it that he's willing to effectively do what they say, and what they're saying is, "Hey, be less shit." So hopefully it'll work. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's like hopefully it's that thing where if you just get someone who's shit and you keep incentivizing them not to be shit, you'll just establish the pattern, and then they'll just start doing it on their own because they don't want to be shit anymore.
Mm,
Like, hopefully that's how it works for most people. Um, I mean, yeah, we'll see what Amber does to him. Yeah, hopefully she has mercy.
mm,
But I wouldn't blame her if she doesn't.
yeah. Um,
As an aside, sorry, so these diamond passes, they're like pretty fucking crazy. You like part of it's like you get to fly out to meet the team or whatever. Like Zed acts like it costs him nothing to get these diamond passes.
yeah.
That's broken as hell. Like what?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I didn't realize how powerful Zed was, but he can effectively, seemingly, just get any kind of in-app purchase for free. So, I mean, that's high. That's high tier powers right there. But this
Yeah,
diamond
like I'm
pass is
just
so far beyond that. Even
like these things would be worth like 10 grand.
yeah,
Like
it kind of reminded me of like a Kickstarter backer
yeah,
reward of the highest tier for like a video game company or something, right?
yeah, exactly. And those rewards are usually like 5
Yeah,
digits.
5 grand, 10 grand.
And
Yeah,
it's like I'm just sort of looking at Zed. I'm like, you could just generate yourself like 20 Bitcoin and then retire. You don't need to be a technomancer anymore. You can just
yeah, true. You have to
like
wonder
what?
what the backlash to that would be, though, right? Like.
Well, that's what I'm thinking with the diamond
Yeah,
passes.
they
Like,
seem powerful enough that it's kind of weird that he can just do that without
yeah,
anything. I don't know.
like, do these really hold up?
Mm, yeah, we'll have to see. Um, so yeah, the grumble stuff. I mean, it's being built up enough that it's starting to hurt my soul a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, honestly though, you never would have thought you were saying this early in the story. How grateful are you that Sheridan was here for this?
Mm,
Like, there's a moment after it in the kitchen where like Avery is literally just starting to process how terrifying that was for her. And she's like shaking, and Sheridan's just sort of like, "Are you all right?"
mm,
Um, she's Sheridan, so she's doing it in like one of the most grating ways possible. Um, but like I just can't help but love the way Sheridan supports Avery here. Well, yeah. This moment she's like, "I don't care who's miserable, except for you. You whine too much," and it's like, okay, well that's just Sheridan for
just
I
yeah,
don't want you to be upset.
yeah, exactly. That's Sheridanese compassion, which is
Exactly.
nice.
Um, yeah, I don't know, like Sheridan in this moment is just kind of proving what Zed said earlier. Like you just need someone to support you, and it helps.
Mm. Yeah. Um, I love that this part ends with Sheridan saying, "Do you think your friend who knows stuff about computers could score me tickets to anywhere that isn't this shithole town?" Which is so great. I want Sheridan to become a practitioner. I think she'd be so great.
No, because I think Sheridan would suffer from the same problem I have, which is when about 90% of your personality is sarcasm. Wait, you can't turn that off. She get herself gainsaid slash forsworn within about a week.
Mm.
I know I would.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but no, like my favorite part of this chapter is actually the very next sentence because like yeah, Sheridan asks, "Can you score me tickets to anywhere that isn't this shithole town?" And then we get like a section break, and then the opening to the next section is the shithole town was sitting on a bus stop bench, looking much as he had at the meeting.
Mm.
I just that's getting my vote for the best transition in this story. It's so
It is a good one, isn't it?
like fantastic use of the idea of an animus of a town.
Yes. So yeah, Avery and Verona head to chat to Ken and get a bit of the lowdown on him.
Yeah, and so Ken is being guarded by and surrounded by goblins, and
Yeah.
then when the Kenneteers arrive, or the two of them, he's like, "Oh, okay, you go do your thing. Just go do whatever goblins do."
Mm.
And yeah, like I mean, obviously we know goblins aren't all that bad, and like so much of this story is trying to get us to let go of these preconceptions or whatever. But I was like, I still can't help but notice the imagery of the embodiment of the town being surrounded by goblins and just being okay with them going and being goblins.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the fact that he's introduced and it's like, oh, here he is and he's surrounded by goblins is like, You're right. It's a bit worrying. Like the embodiment of the town, he's guarded by goblins. What does that say at a wider level? Is it saying,
Yeah.
to tie it into what we were saying last chapter, what you theorized about how the goblins want things to stay how they are? Is it saying like the status quo of this town is being defended by these goblins? Are they going to be the enemy in the final arcs? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, or just like goblins to me still sort of embody this idea of like, it's the sketchy part of town or whatever, like, where they can do more like petty crime. Like that's sort of, what goblins do. And like the Warrens, it's all grimy and mucky. So the idea that like the town is surrounded by, the denizens of the Warrens,
Mm,
um, doesn't send traditionally good imagery past us, I suppose.
mm,
I feel bad for saying this because it's like this is exactly the sort of bullshit that needs to stop, but also I can't help but notice it.
mm. Yeah. Um, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. The whole dynamic of Ken and Kenneth is so wild. Like, we touched on this before, but just the idea of having a town and an embodiment of that town and things into the interplay between those two entities is just so wild.
It's so good. Like, we're already able to just pull apart every fucking detail about. Oh, he was surrounded by goblins when they showed up. What does this mean for the town? Like, there's so much to play with, like with him as like a literary device. But like we also like we go into more of the mechanics of how that works. Like he sort of says if you injure him with some interpretation that could happen to the town. So you got to be careful about like things like Montague when it comes to Kenneth, because if
Mm,
he got possessed by Montague, that sort of energy would seep every aspect of the town, which is obviously very concerning. Um, but then also it's like there's not shortcuts. Like you can't just tell him be nice to Lucy or whatever, and then everyone in the town will stop being racist. Like you don't get the convenient shortcuts to good things, just to the bad things.
mm. Yeah, it's a bit unfair, but oh well. It seems internally consistent.
Yeah, well, because again, it's like that would be affecting the innocence, and it goes like that's a tube that goes one way, not the other. The innocence effect can, but Ken doesn't quite affect the innocence.
Mm,
Like his whole vibe, actually, as he sort of spells out here, is what he can do is just like smooth the tracks for things that are already happening. Like
mm,
if practitioners notice that there's resistance, then they'll be expecting resistance, and then that means I can send people in to resist them.
yeah.
But he can't start anything. He has to be reactionary.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't
Um,
it? It's
yeah.
interesting. I feel like I wouldn't be able to accurately predict how the rules for him would apply in a combat or fast paced situation. So I'm eager to see if that's gonna happen. If witch hunters show up or whatever, how is it gonna react? How are we gonna react? How is Ken gonna play into it?
Mm. But it's just such a cursed existence. Like being someone who's like, oh, he could move the Kenneteers when it doesn't matter, but if it actually matters, he can't do shit all. Like that must piss him off. I
Mm,
don't know how much Ken has a personality. Speaking of others who may or may not have a personality, but Ken must be as frustrating to be as he is to be around.
mm. Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, interestingly, we've seen Lucy's first reaction to Ken. We saw Verona's last chapter, and we see Avery's this chapter. He represents just like conservatism and all the things about this town that are just kind of a drag for Avery. So
Yeah.
yeah, none of our Kenneteers have a great impression of Ken or the town.
Which I think we knew. I mean,
Yeah, but it's nice to see it in such a direct and personified, anthropomorphized way.
yeah, true. Um, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I live in this like the town I'm in. Honestly, I would believe that Ken would be the embodiment of where I live. Um, and like that just about tracks. Like the idea of a lot of people in this town kind of hate that they're still here. Just resonated a
Mm,
lot. I really like the moment though where Ken is sort of like, I got the impression Lucy doesn't like me,
mm.
and they sort of explain that this town has been pretty shit to her, and he's like, "Oh, it's not that bad though, right?" And Verona is like, "I think the fact that you're asking that is part of the problem." And I just, yeah, I mean, this is such a great moment because it's like, of course, Ken isn't just racist, but like, because he's not just the people, but he's like the town. So of course, his racism takes that form of like he doesn't realize how much harder he makes it for Lucy. Like you
Mm,
could totally see these situations where he like tries to get the three of them to do something, and he just doesn't realize that the way he framed it made it harder for Lucy.
mm,
And like when challenged on that, he'll probably pull some bullshit about how like she's just overreacting, and you know if she just picks herself up by her bootstraps, like things will go fine for her.
mm. It's yeah. I mean, when we first heard about Ken, I was hoping that we weren't going to get just an overtly racist character, but now I'm kind of wondering if this is worse. Like, because
Mm.
for him to be in the story, there's going to have to be a kind of implicit, like them letting it slide a little bit, just so the things can progress. You know what I mean?
Well, because they can't like change him on
Exactly.
it. Like, yeah,
Which is just going to kind of suck a bit,
yeah,
right? Like conceptually.
yep.
Um, so
And it's going to be that thing. He's going to keep not realizing he's doing it
Oh
because,
yeah, because
like,
they can't improve him. They can't be like, "Hey Ken,
yeah,
notice that you're doing this thing." He's just going to kind of forget it.
yeah, exactly. Like he talks about that being one of the mechanics, as if they teach him something that the town can't know, he'll just sort of forget it. So
Mm,
it's just going to be over and over again.
mm. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, they kind of wander around. They come across this campsite and raid it and get some possibly enchanted items. And Ken is very grateful to them and almost immediately offers gifts.
To be fair, though, I love the way Ken offers these gifts because it's as soon as one of them, well, it's Verona, ironically.
Mm,
As soon as Verona asks him to do a goddamn thing, he's like, "Oh, do you want that to be a gift?"
mm,
Like, this dude is a grown ass man. Well, in fact, he's thousands of grown ass men, and a literal child asks him to help carry all the stuff he said was great and they should keep. And he's like, "Oh, well, I mean, is that going to be a gift? Like, I'm not just doing this for free." Like,
mm-hmm.
fuck this guy.
Yeah,
It's
bit
just
of a jerk.
um, yeah. I mean, obviously the gifts were like a whole thing, sort of last chapter with how that delivery was done. But yeah, like I just couldn't believe that it was like the second they asked him to contribute a fucking thing, he's like, "Oh, well, is that going to be the gift?" And he offers them way better gifts instead.
Mm,
But again, I couldn't help but notice there's this framing where he's like, "Oh, you don't need to do anything for me because I'm the town and you're the practitioners of the town and you're doing a great job. So I'll give you like great gifts."
mm,
And I'm like, I can't help but think that he's doing this for the wrong reasons. Like I like seeing him be like, "Oh, you guys kick ass. You're great practitioners." I agree with him. But I can't help but feel like the town just defaulting to thinking, "Oh, you guys are great and I'll give you gifts," is just like reinforcing like the Solomon system in a way.
mm.
Like they haven't done anything with him to directly prove that they're great practitioners. Most of their stuff has happened at the Blue Heron Institute. It's just like he's just defaulting to you're the practitioners, you're great and deserve gifts.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's weird. Like, clearly, the fact that they've made this deal to protect Kenneth has left Ken kind of quite happy with them, right? Like, he's clearly very like on their team, even though they don't necessarily want him to be what he is being right now. It's hard to say. Like, he seems obviously quite clueless. He seems like he's a bit nice at heart. Like, I would put him on the same level as characters like Matthew, maybe Ray as well, of like doing or saying the wrong thing fairly often, but at least trying to do the right thing, like could be much worse kind of tier. But then again, it's hard to say, is that just how he's acting towards these Kenneteers um, because they are like they have made this deal, and also obviously, not to put too fine a point on it, but the two Kenneteers we have interacting with him are the two white
Yeah.
Kenneteers, right? Like, what would the dynamic be like if Lucy was here? Who knows?
Yeah, I think it was a very intentional decision by Wildbow to not have Lucy at this first Ken meeting because I
Yeah.
imagine Lucy's going to bring a much more direct energy
Yes.
to her talks with Ken.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it was sort of intentional to show that like I mean, because I didn't walk away from this with the highest impression of Ken myself. Like I definitely thought a bit less of him than it seems like you might have.
Mm.
Um, but it's kind of like either way, I think you sort of walk away with this idea of he's not fantastic even when Lucy's not in the picture.
Yes.
That way we can introduce Lucy, and then when it's highlighted, like if he comes out looking even shittier after meeting Lucy,
Well,
You know,
yeah.
kind of be able to point back at this and say, well, it's not like he's perfect even without her.
Yeah, I don't think Lucy's going to come in playing especially hardball, but I think part of that interaction is going to be Ken is going to say some very shitty things, and Lucy is going
Yeah,
to
yeah,
rightfully call him out on them, and that's just he's practically not going to be able to improve, right? I don't know. It's
yeah,
interesting because it's like, whose fault is this? Is Ken at fault for this? He doesn't choose what the town members are like. I don't know. He's just kind of like a symptom. He's an
yeah.
ambulant symptom of this town. I don't know.
Yeah, what's going to be telling though as well is like how he responds to getting called out,
Mm,
because that is sort of the modal response you could expect a person in Kennet to have being called out on their bullshit.
mm,
Um, yeah, yeah, I don't know. Like, yeah, I think it was important that we kind of see that he's not great even without Lucy in the picture, as we sort of build up to those two meeting. Um, but yeah, I can't help but just get this vibe from him that like the way he talks about the practitioners of the town being great felt in this very hollow way of like, well, that's like just their role more than them as individuals. Like there was no you did this and that's why you're great. It's just you're the practitioners. You're doing great. Like, fucking out of the box reasoning, which I feel like yeah, is part of what I want to see go away. Because if we look at the average practitioner at the Blue Heron Institute, I don't think they deserve that kind of praise.
mm, mm, mm. Yeah.
Yeah, as we sort of round out this chapter, because yeah, they like find the loot and then have this convo with Ken, and the chapter sort of ends. Um, I want to touch on like what we learnt about Lucy here.
Yeah.
Um, like so, because Verona sort of is like, hey, Avery, what the hell was that thing yesterday where you brought up bringing in practitioners? And Avery sort of goes on this whole thing about how she has all these regrets about when they were talking to Nicolette or with Yadira about how she didn't stand up and those relationships went sourer than they could have before they were repaired. And Avery's now reached this point where it's like she's going to voice her opinion more, and if other people don't like it, that's their issue to deal with, not hers.
Mm,
And that's just so not the Avery who we met at the start of this story. Like, explicitly, she's talking about the regrets she has from earlier in the story. Um, but she's, yeah, like her part in this journey as we step into the next part of this story is like she's learned that she can't be responsible for how everyone else feels. She just needs to put herself out there and try to be nice to them. And if they don't want to pick it up, then that's their problem.
mm,
And that's why she has that moment with Grumble earlier in the chapter,
mm.
obviously. Um, yeah, it's just
Yeah.
nice seeing her get that confidence to be able to stand up for who she is.
Yeah, it's good to see her be more proactive about the things that she thinks and kind of knows in her heart are right, and it's going to be a strength. It's going to be a boon to the Kenneteers, definitely.
Yeah, and it takes me back to that conversation she had with Lucy in like 2.1 or something. It was very early in Arc 2 where Lucy's where they were walking back. It was like the night after the Hungry Choir, and Avery was sort of feeling down, and then Lucy had gave her that whole speech about how you can't worry what other people think and blah blah blah. And Avery was like, "I don't want to grow up into you."
Mm,
Um, and what I like is she hasn't. She's taken like her own flavor of the same lesson. Like Lucy did kind of use that to grow a bit more suspicious and like, Avery. Sorry, Lucy just sort of puts it out there and wants you to prove to her that you can be good before she'll like be nice to you. Whereas
mm,
Avery puts the niceness out there and gives it back and like just ignores you if you're not going to give it back to her.
mm.
Um, I just really like it as an Avery spin on what Lucy was trying to tell her to do in 2.1.
Yeah, true. Good, good, good looking back. Good reflecting. um,
Um, yeah, and then the chapter ends with Avery thinking, "Hey, this is like when I started at high school."
mm.
But these are actually founded fears now because these are monsters that might try to kill me.
It's a good moment.
But again, like she uses that for drive almost this time. Like she's using that. She's like challenging them and saying, "I want to bring in allies." She's going out trying to find allies. She wants to fix the social problems here. Whereas like we saw when she joined high school, she just retreated into herself to a damaging degree.
Mm,
So she's really grown, and I can't wait to see where she sort of ends up on this trajectory.
mm, yeah. Um, and that's the end of 9.2. Let's get into 9.3 extra material. Sorry, that was 9.3. This is the 9.3
Yeah.
extra material. Um, Path Practicalities. So Avery takes us through some general thoughts about paths.
Yeah, it's sort of a big info dump on what she's learning about the paths, and I mostly was just excited because I was like, I miss these Avery doodles. They're so fucking adorable.
Mm. Yeah, no, they're good, aren't they? Um, yeah, it's the doodles are awesome. Diving into Avery's notes, it's surprisingly scientific. I mean, you've got this lens of like silly drawings and weird analogies that is very Avery, but the consistency of logic behind the paths and how they work is so Wildbow. Like taking kind of tropes and fantasy slash horror thoughts, tying those tropes together with a system that feels cohesive and consistent within in world logic. Just great stuff. So much fun to read and see how it all kind of fits together.
Yeah, like this extra material does a lot to sort of info dump on like bridging the gap between us understanding how these paths and extra spaces are kind of broken and exist outside the rules, but how that brokenness actually kind of fits into the rules.
Mm.
Like stuff like how the boon, like some of the boons here are presented as like the universe just kind of misunderstands what you did on the path and
Yeah.
like levels you up accordingly.
Mm.
Like it sort of thinks, like my understanding from something like the Forest Ribbon Trail is like Avery comes back and it's sort of like the universe is like, wait, she went and did some fucking epic journey of personal growth. Okay, what's personal growth? Her like 10 points. That's how bad.
Yeah. Oh,
It's like really,
she should have
yeah.
gained these on this journey of personal growth. She must have gained these skills, these things, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So let's just shortcut her there.
And it's like just because yeah, like the spirits do a bad job of filling in the gaps from the broken pieces. I guess like it's really fun how
Yeah.
we sort of take these places that up until now have been so outside our understanding of the system and kind of yeah, like make sense of how they fit with it.
Mm. Yeah. Um. Yeah. I don't think there's that much to touch on this part because it's very much just delivering a bunch of cool information, but it's really great. Go read it if anyone's not reading them. I mean, we say this every time. Go read them. They're great.
I mean, look at the script. You'll have noticed I pulled out some things.
Yeah. Sure.
But like, yeah, I know I agree. This is mostly like a bit of an info dump, so it doesn't super relate to here. But I really want to touch on the one model part where Avery talks about there was like a family of finders, and they kind of stopped being finders because they figured out this path so well that it became unlost, um, and like fell to earth.
Mm.
And I just love this because you could sort of think of finders, or at least I have always thought of finders as these kind of like dreamers or like inventors. Like they're people going out. If the cosmos of the other verse is like the cosmos of thought and ideas, then like going out to the fringes and to the lost parts is like yeah, working on the very edge of current thought. And so I sort of view them as yeah, dreamers and inventors. And I love this idea that like you discover a path is kind of akin to inventing something, and then if you learn how to turn it into a business, then it stops being a lost thing and falls to earth. Because now it's just part of the system.
Yeah. Yeah, I did quite like this bit as well. It's just it's interesting. I mean, like the idea of the lost uh, we it comes so naturally out of the thoughts that um that the practice is about like paying attention and care to something, giving it power, right? And then the lost is the kind of opposite of that. But then what happens for finders who are basically people who focus on the things that don't have attention and give them attention? It's an interesting it's interesting to see an example of how that reconciles, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, cuz I definitely I felt quite smug reading some parts of this because I had been in discussions on Discord about like what the paths and the cosmology of the Pactverse was, and this was very close to the interpretation I'd been pushing. So um there was a bit of smugness because it seemed like I was mostly right. And I really like how it all just like it felt like these were a lot of pieces I was kind of able to put together because it just does make sense for how like how it's all been presented.
Mm, mm,
Um,
yeah.
but I also think like as well the paths. It's not just inventors and dreamers. Like this is that whole thing where things don't have to be a a metaphor or a direct comparison to one thing. Like you also get vibes of like how people treat traveling, like that whole idea of oh, you go out there and like you spend a couple of hours on this path and come back as like a changed person. Like that's definitely how some people treat like some forms of travel. Like you go out there and experience this other culture and come back and it's like, oh, I left part of me out there and now I've come back and like I've gained all these new skills or whatever.
Mm.
I mean, I know none of us have really done much traveling in the past year, but if you go back to the before times,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but yeah, I also just want to say, like, it seems like humans are doing a really good job of like understanding and categorizing like the space, like all the
Mm.
lost things in general.
Mm.
Like you can see why others like these primevals are having so much trouble finding places to hide from humanity. Like, remember Durashare's one was in this fucking convoluted swamp space or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like humans are growing to this point where you can't even hide on the edge of like reality or what is
Yeah.
known
There's no
because
part of
we're
reality that is safe for another to be uninterrupted in.
yeah, like there are so many theories about how we can go and like I've seen in the fandom about like how the Candidates can get missed back and blah blah blah, and it's like that's sort of the ultimate proof of this. Like if you can find someone who's lost
Yeah.
with a capital L,
Yeah.
um, like yeah, where can others hide? Like humanity really has taken over the entire cosmos of the otherverse. If
Mm.
we're also doing that to the paths.
Yeah. It's I don't know. It's kind of worrying to an extent that like the, getting missed back, you're right, would be a symbol that there really is nothing that practitioners can't do that to bend the laws of these systems to their own, to their own whims.
Yeah. Like speaking of, like Avery has that list of practices that are like find irrelevant that she's been learning, and like the first one is like the Earth Ball. It's like this Pokeball type setup where you throw it at stuff and it stops being lost for a bit.
Mm.
Um, and like that felt like it had sort of little colonialist vibes to me of this
Mm.
whole like as a finder you're going into this space that is like all these broken ideas coming together and forming something new, and your
Mm.
response when you don't like it is you just throw an earth ball at it and be like stop doing weird shit.
You like
Like
tie it back down to your
yeah,
rules.
it's like stop being be normal.
Yeah.
Um, like is probably something you have to throw when you chuck these balls.
Yeah.
Um,
These Earth Pokeballs.
Oh, I don't get the impression that's how we're meant to think of them being used, but it totally was how I pictured them being used. It's
Mm.
just like little tennis ball sized things you throw at stuff and you yell "be normal" at it.
Mm.
But yeah, like it's interesting though because like these little symbols of Earth and the system can like make lost things just kind of behave when you're thrown at them. Like it's compared to how Sharon works. Um, it makes me think like we're talking about at the moment familiarizing Snowdrop and Avery, and this was a discussion we had right when Snowdrop first showed up, which is like, would she lose her lying thing if she becomes a familiar?
Mm.
Because I feel like these balls existing suggests that like she probably would.
Yeah, I wonder. I suspect it would depend on how Avery treats that relationship, right? Surely, like, Avery and how actively Avery tries to push back against any kind of, like, merging of personality bleed or whatever you want to call it might have an impact there. I don't know.
Well, I'm more just thinking like the familiar relationship is this very formal like part of the system thing, and it's like you're bringing Snowdrop into the system a lot by doing that.
Yeah, true.
In a way, like so, yeah. I don't know. Like again, if you view like I've compared the idea of Lost to, like illegal immigrants or aliens
Mm.
or whatever in the past, and
Mm.
it's like, is this the equivalent of like Snowdrop getting like a green card marriage sort of thing? Like I know that's not what any of them want, but it's like she'll be more registered in the system by becoming a familiar. I would guess. Maybe there's a transformation on the ritual that they can do to
Yeah.
stop that being the case.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. I wonder. I guess we'll have to kind of see that to get that more concretely because I don't think we've seen, we've seen familiars of the musses, right? But that's
Yeah.
it, isn't it? I'm trying to think.
No, there was the Leos sibling, and they had the Toad familiar
True, right.
who was an ex like doctor who started being a practitioner and then was a vestige or something.
Yeah, yeah, but I guess the point I want to make was for the musses, especially, it feels like it's like these are others that are bound to their will. It feels a lot more like, again,
Mm.
colonialist, right?
Well, like there was implications that those were familiars of other people who had been stolen.
Yes, I guess that makes it even stronger that sense. Um, yeah, so yeah, we'll have to see, I suppose. Next, Avery shares details on this hinted at path, the station promenade, and it's pretty much Crypt of the Necrodancer, right? I mean, like, I think everyone had this reaction. It sounds like Crypt of the Necrodancer.
Yeah, I I mean, this is gonna be great. Like, I can't wait for it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, it's really cool because it feels like a meta path. Like,
Mm,
it's a particularly pathy path. It's pulling in others from other paths. It has trains, so it almost feels like it's been set up conceptually already as this like central path.
yeah, or a path that is specifically there to travel between other paths as well feels very
Yeah,
apt. Yeah.
but it's like, did like I don't think that's how paths work. So it's like can you use this, say if you find the train to the forest ribbon trail and you stick miss on it instead of the wolf. Like I wonder if like, by default when you load it in, it's like the wolf will move towards the train to go to the forest ribbon trail
Mm,
and you like get miss to beat her there and that's like misses the wolf and miss
yeah.
can be like, yeah, go on,
I don't know.
whatever.
I mean, obviously,
Um
part of it was some others were recognized from other paths, so presumably
yeah.
that is a part of it. I, I don't
But
know.
I guess I got the impression that usually once you're an other in a path,
That's your role. Yeah.
that's your role. Um, and so this idea that this one sort of opened up and is like it feels metapathy to me because that opens up the ability to change other paths, which feels big. Um,
Yeah. I mean, it could be like, like we had the idea of an Alcazar that allows you to get inside a system and actually fundamentally rewrite it. Maybe that's what this is for other paths. Like you have the opportunity to actually tangibly change the way that other paths function to an extent. I don't know. Who
yeah.
knows?
Well, like this is why I've sort of been calling it a metapath because I wonder if part of the glue that is sticking this one together is some findery concepts. Because obviously, lots of finders get lost. Like, so if there's like an idea that a finder has discovered or whatever,
Mm,
and then they all get lost and they don't share it, then like it would make sense to me that there are lots of findery specific things that are lost
mm,
so, like, this could maybe be a path that is partially strung together from finder related things. And that's why, like, the idea of traveling between paths feels like a specifically findery thing. Aside from Miss, I don't know that we know many other lost who wander between other paths.
mm,
So, how much of this is like, it's like a path built on what finders do, which, like, feels like a really fun meta idea to explore.
mm.
A path built on understanding the paths is cool.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And like, wait, does it fuck with the rules of paths? That would be very fun. We've just learned, oh, this is the way. Like, here are all the rules for paths
Yeah.
that we've managed to like deduce, and it's sort of like, okay, now we're going to break those.
Yeah, I mean, it's classic for this universe for us to introduce rules just so we can kind of see exceptions to them, right? So, what? Definitely.
Yeah. So yeah,
Um,
if this place is built on broken versions of understandings of the paths, I think I think that'd be so cool.
yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, presumably we will see this path play out in an Avery
Yeah.
chapter in a little bit, which will be fun in the next, 3 or 4. Can't wait for that.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. Like as we touched on earlier, it's such an Avery path. Like it's one that's
Mm,
crowded with others. Like
yeah.
that's like there's no way Avery goes here and the wolf isn't there. Like it's just the wolf is gonna be there, right? Like
Yeah.
my hope is that the ballerina from Mrs. Interlude is there as well.
Or Miss herself, theoretically.
Yeah, I mean Miss could be there. That almost just feels like it would
Feels
be
too easy.
like, yeah, or too much. Like I feel like we have to work to get Miss. Like,
Yeah.
it would be weird if she just showed up there and Avery would be like,
Oh yeah, get on
"Come
this
give me a
train and now
hug."
you're back. Yeah.
Here, quick, I'll use this escape rope while you hug me. Like, it just
Yeah.
yeah.
We'll see.
I feel like we'll have to like, and that's why like the ballerina feels like the person who'll point us in the right direction or something.
Mm,
The wolf, I'm sure, will just be friendly, there for a chat.
mm,
I mean, what's weird about the wolf being there though is everyone has their own version of the wolf. Like, how does that work?
yes, indeed. I don't know the answer to that.
Are there multiple wolves for?
Mm,
Is it like you know how there's like those? We got those two gate things set up so you can see. Does everyone just see a different wolf? Anyway, I can't wait. It's gonna be great.
yeah. We'll have to wait and see, because unfortunately that's the end of our bonus material, and that's the end of our discussions. Except for our pale predictions, predictions that people have left in our pale predictor spreadsheet, which you can find a link to in the show notes down below. We pull out predictions that the community is making to see who's going to predict who the murderer is, and all kinds of other things. Elliot, do you have any fun predictions that you want to touch on this week?
Yeah, I've put out like a very long prediction from Loon. So I won't read it out word for word. But basically, Loon is sort of coming up with ideas, or sort of advocating is the word I was looking for. Advocating for the idea we talked about of like how Avery should bring in other practitioners to help the town. And basically, Loon's trying to point at someone they've met at the BHI who can specifically help one of the new others in Kennet.
Mm,
So, for instance, Bree and the Hungry Choir seem like a great thing to pair with the ghouls who are constantly hungry and need food.
mm,
Like, can you get the ghouls through the Hungry Choir ritual? Is the exact idea, which
mm.
isn't a perfect solution to my mind, but like,
But it's an interesting
um,
connection in the very least.
yeah, or same like Jabba is this alchemist's construction who is being poorly maintained by people who aren't alchemists, and it's like, well, we've got those Leos children that Lucy's mates with. We've got like Talia the doll maker. Like those seem like great people who might be able to help Jabba if you set up the deal right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Montague might be a former elemental. We obviously have Sol and his delightful mum.
Mm-hmm.
Liz, Loon pairs Liz with Fernanda as people who can like share tricks about how to grow into being less of a manipulative piece of shit.
Yeah, that one feels less practitioner and just more like Liz needs some people to point her in the right direction.
Which,
Personality
to be
wise.
fair, that is the vibe I get from Liz. Like, I don't think Liz has problems beyond identifying who she is as an individual.
Yeah, true.
And I actually like Fernanda as a pick for somebody who could pair with that.
Yeah.
And then Loon also talks about Crooked Rook and maybe something to do with the 3 Oni mages at the Blue Heron Institute.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, there seems to be a really common fan theory that Crooked Rook is the Oni that taught those 3 their tricks. Which I don't know if I buy into personally, but yeah.
But it could be.
Either way.
Definitely. There are some connections there, but it's hard to know if those are just because they're both Oni.
That's the thing, like, a lot of people point to the box-related imagery, like Crooked Rook uses boxes, and the Blue Heron Institute kids, the Oni they worked off was stuck in a box.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's true, but then, like, the whole point of Oni is they're outside the box, so I don't know how much the box imagery is just Oni-related imagery.
Yeah, for sure. I agree.
I kind of like the idea of it being a bit more of a bigger world than there's just this one Oni in Canada. You know?
Yeah. No, I really like this prediction. It's a great. We've been looking for ways that, I think Avery doesn't have a great pitch on why the Ken and others should let practitioners in, but this gives a number of great pitches for it, and I think they're all very compelling.
Yeah, this is a great way to sort of advocate for what we were talking about with like let Avery bring the other practitioners in because this is how everyone can help each other.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, I'm sure there's ways these others can help those practitioners as well. Like that'd probably be the other side of this prediction that I'd love to see someone write up. Like, what problems do Blue Heron Institute people have that
practitioners
the
could
others
solve,
can help?
that others could solve. Yeah, interesting. I wonder. I mean, maybe Liz and Fernanda will share tips with each other.
Yeah, exactly.
I put out a prediction from Lapsed Classicist who predicts that these others hiding in Kennet, who basically they're having a lot of trouble finding, the best way to flush them out will be for Verona to do her domain ritual, because that kind of claims an area and has others in the area come to contest it. And we even had an example from a domain text about a practitioner using their claim as like a bait for others. So I just thought that's a great prediction that could really pan out.
So one of the other things from the domain chapter that seemed relevant to this is there is one line that sort of says you can everyone who wants to challenge the claim can. So as well as flushing those people out, I think the domain ritual will be very fascinating because it's like which can it others might actually challenge
want to challenge. Would the culprits actually challenge it? I mean, theoretically, Matthew and Edith wouldn't, even if they were the culprits, since they're kind of engineering the situation. But what would that challenge look like? Who would potentially challenge it from the rest of our group? Maybe the goblins? I don't know.
Well, what does challenge it mean? Like, do you have to full on veto it, or can you be like, you can have this, but you need to do X for me?
Yes.
You know? Like that's the thing. All the can it others might just suddenly come out of the fucking woodwork.
It's like, here's this claim. I'll allow this, but here's the bargaining chip that I'm going to play.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I can't wait for the domain.
We'll have to see. But yeah, that's thank you to Lapsed Classicist and Loon for leaving those predictions. If you have a prediction and you want to get points for predicting cool things, click the link to the form in our show notes below. But that's the show. Thanks for joining us, folks.
Yes. Please hop into the discussion thread in the show notes down below if you want to correct anything we said wrong, or if you have any of your own ideas.
Yep.
That's the place to get in touch with us.
Yep. You can also check out our Twitter at MediaMD Podcast, or just search Pale Reflections on Twitter and you'll find us, where you can see all kinds of neat little things from community interactions, live reads, etc.
Yeah, in fact, this episode is a day later than normal, and if you're wondering why that is, we already said it on Twitter.
Yeah,
so check out
it's your own fault for not following the Twitter. That's where you can get the most up-to-date news about the show.
Yep, don't forget about our website, doofmedia.com. All the great shows on the Doof Media Network are listed there, including the newest one, Pace.
Yes, Pace, the second episode of Pace has recently come out. Third episode's coming soon, and it's really starting to ramp up. I'm pretty thrilled with how it's been going, so definitely go and check it out if you want to check out a actual play podcast set in a hypothetical future of the Otherverse.
Yeah, if you haven't checked it out already, like episode 1, lays all the groundwork. Episode 2 actually starts running with it. So
yeah.
Now that both of those two are out now, I can definitely say give it those two, and that's the chance you need to give it.
Yeah, give it a shot. We think you'll like it. But anyway, thanks for joining us. If you want to support the Doof Media Network, you can go to patreon.com/doofmedia and support the network there. There are a bunch of cool perks that you get access to. And while you're on Patreon, why not also head over to Wildbow's Patreon, patreon.com/wildbow, where you can support Wildbow for all the great content that he's making.
Yeah. We obviously wouldn't be here without him.
Mm-hmm.
So on that note, we'll see you all next week for more Shaking Hands.
See you, folks.